as we're starting to talk about onboarding, I like to kind of start with sort of what I call the IKEA conundrum. So I'm going to put this out there. What do you think is one of the most important pieces to providing individuals with a great experience? Anyone want to venture a guess? Right, it is the instructions. Onboarding to me is basically that first look, that first impression, potentially even that first date type of thing of you bringing somebody in and explaining to them what it is that you're going to be doing. So essentially, it's that first impression that you're giving, and what are you wanting that individual to really think about you going forward. So really, there you go. It's a way of saying, hey, don't shove the old lady off of the bus seat and take it for yourself kind of thing. It's moving towards some other pieces like that. When you think about onboarding, one of the biggest pieces here is I like to kind of ask with regards to that is, have any of you ever been maybe a part of an event or a program or even, let's say, a committee or something like that, where you weren't really given that information that you needed to start, let alone be successful in the work that you were doing? So you're kind of just wandering around, sort of have no idea what to do with your hands, you're kind of slapping your thighs, being like, what am I doing here type thing, kind of what, and stuff like that. So has anybody ever felt that way, that awkwardness? Yeah, most of us have. And so with onboarding, what you're doing is you're grabbing their attention and providing them with that pertinent information that they can then use to be effective members of whatever it is they're doing. It really always starts people off on the right foot, and it builds into that trust and that value felt by that person. Onboarding, no, we'll just leave it here, sorry. Onboarding into all those activities and processes that you're going through are basically meant to do about, when you break it down to sort of those three things, they're meant to sort of reduce that uncertainty or that anxiety that a newcomer inevitably feels when they're coming into a new thing that they're trying or a new environment. It helps them make sense of that environment, and it also provides that sort of intangible and explicit knowledge to be able to fully function as a member of that group. To me, onboarding is sort of that unsung hero of whenever you're working or managing individuals, and it has more weight than what we actually give it credit for. So in terms of onboarding, it's basically that initiation of any new board member to an organization. And really, when we're looking at this, it's really valuable in fostering those relationships, encouraging growth and development, as well as help orientate and transition newcomers to a variety of environments. In fact, there's actually research that suggests that agencies that actually engage in onboarding processes or put weight into providing sort of those key aspects and really highlighting sort of how the company norms work and how they behave are actually more effective than those who do not. So the level at which a person is onboarded and basically those exchanges that they have with the existing members really have an impact on the attitudinal aspects for that individual and what they're putting towards that role that they are upholding. And with this study, so through a lens of what socialization and self-efficacy principles, we're actually looking at this in terms of how we can apply this to more of a volunteer context. So the reasoning behind this project was simplistic in that it was a start to addressing sort of the narrative surrounding the onboarding experience in a volunteer context. The workplace setting dominates the literature surrounding onboarding right now, and so it's really a way to help us sort of maybe not only broaden the scope of organizational effectiveness as well as onboarding, but also in the field of volunteer management as well. It's a way that we can actually, the interest lies in sort of really highlighting and strengthening any similarities that we can maybe take from the workplace setting and apply it into a volunteer framework. Basically looking at, when it's not associated with our livelihood and there's more of an altruistic point of view towards it, how does that maybe affect some of these aspects? So this was actually inspired by some of my personal experience. Like I said before, I have worked in the sport and rec field for a long time, and one of those positions was actually where I was community coordinator for an organization, and what was needed it was basically my job to manage all of the community boards that were sort of under our umbrella, and there was about 17 or 18 of them scattered all over the province, and each one of them was ran by a volunteer committee that basically ran the programming for the organization. So I kind of always say that was sort of my job I managed volunteers who managed volunteers. And that's why I have sort of that focus on that volunteer leadership aspect. Really looking at how we can sort of discern that clout in terms of the onboarding experience and how it can actually affect sort of somebody's self-efficacy and their motivations. I actually saw people as they were coming in and new members were coming on board, how they were brought on board, the information that they were privy to, how that actually translated to them maybe changing the way in how they voted, who they wanted to work with, and basically effectively they changed their behavior to kind of fit into that organization and what they felt more comfortable. And again, it was all privy to this experience that they got. So basically, when we're looking at this, to kind of break it down a little bit, Hoy and Doherty sort of promoted an integrated model of board performance per se. And what it really did, sorry, you can connect it for there, really just looked at how, and they suggested that we need to kind of dig a little deeper into organizational and board performance. But when we looked at this, they were looking at the fact that there's organizational factors, individual factors, and environmental factors that really, which then translate to board performance and organizational performance. I was suggesting that the organizational factors here, basically looking at that's where we would have sort of those orientation practices, actually have the individual factors as well. And that's where we find sort of those motivations, as well as that's where we can efficacy and how that translates. Is basically a very important motivational construct that really influences our behavioral outcomes, such as choice, effort, persistence, achievement, even environmental regulation. The idea here is basically what people think can affect what they do and how they act, and their actions can actually alter their environments. So with this in mind, the onboarding experience and its influence in fostering individual motivations, this can have implications on organizational performance. So that's sort of the setup of kind of how I came to be to kind of in this realm of area of what I wanted to look in. So now we'll just dive into a little bit of what I did. So again, because the workplace setting dominates this area of the literature, I really wanted to kind of extract the fact that, and kind of just look at the idea that, hey, we don't really know a lot about volunteerism in this aspect. So we're looking at the basic element of just figuring out what it is, does that onboarding experience look like for volunteers. So how do new volunteer board members experience the onboarding process within nonprofit sport organizations was basically my main research point that I wanted to draw out. So with this, I basically took an interpretive approach and I paired it with thematic analysis. When I started recruiting for this project, I was basically looking for individuals who were adults, so age 18 and older, and I was also looking for that they were considered to be newcomers into their group, which basically meant that they were about 6 months to 1 year into their tenure with the group that they were participating with. I was very fortunate enough to be able to have 7 participants for my study. And with that, I conducted semi-structured interviews with each of them, and they all hailed from all across Canada, right from the West Coast all the way to the East Coast as well. From there, I basically, it seemed fairly basic in terms of what happened, but we recorded all the interviews, transcribed them, and then from there, basically looked at all the transcriptions and started coding and pulling out any common pieces of information of what they were telling me and how I kind of connected those to some themes that I feel emerged from the data. Yeah, keep going. Sorry. So with this, basically, there were several themes that came out of the data collection. Basically looking at one, what hard and soft factors make up that onboarding experience, and two, how they impact sort of those individual factors and that stewardship of the board. And with this, what I decided to do, and this might change as we go forward, but what I decided to do is to sort of highlight that in a visual aspect to really showcase how all these themes work together. So I came up with what I call the two-winged application model, or the TWAM. And this is kind of what it looks like. So there's two wings of input that create the crux and throughput of the onboarding experience. One being more procedural based and the other one being a little bit more dynamic based. And basically what we're looking at here is that the model encompasses the idea that the process, interactional exchanges, and socialization of the newcomer establishes feelings of trust and value that this study demonstrates to be a significant undertone to the individual factors, and again, that behavior and stewardship of the board directives. So this captures the self-efficacy principles and configures with the tangible dynamic that build into the onboarding experience. So now I'm just going to pull out a couple highlights from each of the themes, kind of looking at just some of those bigger pieces that came out of the research, out of the project. And so first we're going to kind of look at process. And within process, I really want to focus in on sort of that orientation piece. So with this, the participants really highlighted that the preparation and setup for newcomers is a primary element in setting the tone of the level of professionalism of the board and ultimately the sense of competence that is exuded. So many of the participants said that they might not consider themselves to have like a specific or formal orientation, but there was some type of activity that did bring them onto the board. And that actually, how that happened, and ironically, it was quite interesting because most participants were left to sort of navigate that on their own and were sometimes given very minimal guidance on that. And so this was seen in the results because the confidence the participants felt stemmed from what insight and support they were provided, the exchanges that they did have, if they did have some, and the intentional investment that they felt was being put into them. So by providing a specific type of orientation, and keep in mind that onboarding and orientation can sometimes be used interchangeably, but in this regard, we're looking at orientation as being a part of the overarching onboarding aspect. And so looking at that sort of that checkbox in terms of this is what happened. And it's also closely tied to that information organization knowledge acquisition theme as well. And I should mention also that because participants were mostly left on their own, that actually did seem to taint the experience that they received when they first joined the board. Information sharing is sort of that very much that undercurrent that is very prevalent in the information and organizational knowledge acquisition theme. When we're talking about information sharing, it's basically that information that is being provided to the newcomer to effectively help them to be an effective member of the team. We're not only looking at the types of information that are being provided, but also how it's being provided as well. One of the most interesting things that came out of this for me was the fact that corporate history and memory seemed to have a very significant stronghold in what the participants were wanting to see. This was going beyond more of those logistical pieces of the organization, but actually more of that storytelling of how they came to be, the larger scope, where they sit in, if there's sort of a hierarchy that they need to be involved in. Also, who's around the board makeup kind of thing, why they're there, and also if there was any trials or tribulations that they needed to go through, how they came out of that. What it really signified to the newcomers that were there was, one, that again, it really fostered those feelings of trust and value just because they felt that they were now being accepted into the group. And it really helped them to align with the mandates and the directives of the board. And so then they felt more closeness to the organizations, which then translated again to their willingness and to be better stewards for what the organization was trying to achieve. Moving to the other side, it's also necessary to really understand the original intention for why somebody wants to get involved in a board. In this regard, these can be things like passion, and that can actually be sort of broken out into other things like ambition, whether that's to see the sport explode across the province, or whether that's just to see the organization succeed itself, or whether they felt that there was a duty or responsibility to be participant, whether they had a kid involved or they just didn't want the organization to fall flat so that people would miss out participating. Knowing why people are coming in to volunteer and provide their time does not speak to the onboarding experience directly, but again, it contributes to that understanding and it connects to the principles surrounding self-efficacy in terms of motivations and how one seeks to behave or operate to ensure their desires are being addressed. In addition to this, we also look at expectations and managing those expectations, and that's also in a reciprocal account with the board expectations as well. We say this because inevitably everybody comes in generally with expectations. Even if somebody says, I have no expectations, they're still coming in with a sense of something. So we all have knowledge, we're all operating in the world at this point, you know, all of you in this room are adults, you have life experience, you're bringing that with you consistently. And the expectations that you bring, the original intention to participate, that all makes up the entirety of the experience that you're getting. So if you flip to the other side and go, hey, I'm expecting this type of information and you don't get it, then that's inevitably going to potentially put a negative spin on the experience that you're getting as well. So managing expectations is also something that helps individuals to be effective members of the team. And then lastly, I also want to look at sort of that person-organizational fit. So basically the participants highlighted that the culture board was important in terms of their confidence and comfortability that they felt. It was impacted by the practice ways regarding how they were treated. So if you remember me talking about how I witnessed people basically say, you know, swaying in maybe, again, their decision-making, how they're voting, how they're operating on a board, these implied tensions felt by newcomers, again, shifting in position, sharing thoughts, even speaking up, was speculated with how they were brought on and acclimatized to the board. Participants in this area also noted that they needed to prove themselves, and up until that point, they actually stayed fairly, kind of proceeded a little bit more cautiously, and they outright said and commented that they actually waited to see how things work before putting effort into inserting themselves into that group. So by looking at these types of pieces, we can see that group culture is seemingly an influential component of the onboarding experience, as well in how someone might adjust their behaviors. So to kind of bring it all together and to sum up and to come in a nice, neat little package, what I wanted to do with this project, just because I have worked out sort of in the field, I wanted this to have some value in terms of application. So I thought, just kind of looking at what came out of this project, what came out of this study, I decided to kind of highlight a few practical recommendations that organizations could potentially use as they move forward. So one is basically you want to look at providing logistical background information of the organization as well as the corporate history and memory. Again, that helps them to sort of feel more valued, more sort of accepted by the group when you're imparting this type of information. You want to seek to understand the original intentions for participation and manage those expectations, just so that the individual knows what they're getting, you know what you're getting from the individual, and you can work together to really foster those relationships and grow the organization as well. Offer the opportunity for newcomers to prove themselves. Okay, by doing this, again, if you go back to sort of the model there, you can see that that's where that trust and value is also coming into play. And then the last one, which I feel is sort of that more important one, is that onboarding experience really is an investment, and it's an investment for the good for organizations. Basically, it's that mindset that the activities and processes that are offered to the new member and the dynamics and how they are followed through with influence that self-efficacy by way of impacting elements of motivation and confidence. And with that, organizations that invest in developing these processes or putting effort towards developing these elements of the individual investing right back into that organization to help it succeed and grow going forward as well. So in closing, just to really highlight, kind of bring it all together, organizations that intentionally provide newcomers with an understanding of their corporate memory, who manage expectations by understanding an individual's purpose for getting involved, and who adopt a group culture that offers new members the opportunity to prove themselves, fosters feelings of trust, acceptance, and value. And that the individual onboarding experience unearths the level of investment that organizations are presenting to their new members. This helps individuals in aligning themselves with the organization and influences their personal motivations in being good stewards of the board, which can impact overall board performance as well. So really invest in that onboarding aspect, and you can actually reap the benefits of that and get a good ROI, return on investment. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Korinne. Sorry, I know I'm behind you. We're just going to take a break just for a minute or two so we can get switched up between the two presenters. And if we have time at the end, we'll take a moment or two for questions. So, Dion, I'll get you to come up. I'll get you to switch the microphones.
Oh, yep.